Well, we've milled our grain to the perfect consistency to get a great mash. So let's go ahead and talk about the process as the grain moves through the brew house. When we milled the grain, we transferred it into the grist case, which is a big holding vessel from which we drop the grain into the Mash Tun. This tank is the Mash Tun, you can tell because that's what it says. What we'll do is we will drop the grain into the Mash Tun, and while it's falling in there, we'll be hydrating it with tempered water, usually around 165, 168 degrees, something like that. And the goal is to achieve the perfect mash temperature once we have all the water and the grain mixed together. When we all have it in here, we'll check that temperature. There are some variances in the temperature that we use based on the beer that we're making. The temperature of the mash impacts the mouthfeel of the beer. If we mash at a higher temperature, say up around 157, 158 degrees, a little bit higher maybe, we will create a beer that has more mouthfeel. We'll have left more unfermentable sugars in the wort. If we mash at a lower temperature, we get better conversion of the starches into the sugars, and so we will have less mouthfeel in the beer because we were able to ferment more of those sugars down in the final product. The mash will sit in the Mash Tun for 30, 40 minutes, depending on the brewery and what we have going on that day. After it's sat there for a little bit, we need to start to prepare it to transfer into the kettle, into the brew kettle. And the way we do this is we begin to pull off the sweet extract off the bottom of the tank, and it will move over into our grant tank on the side. And from there, we pump it back up onto the top of the mash bed. So we're taking the liquid off the bottom and redepositing it back on top of the mash bed. And what this does is we start to pull off bits of grain and husk material and dust and such that comes in that first runnings off the mash, put it back on top of the mash bed, and as that liquid runs down through, we're essentially now using our entire mash as a filter for our extract. And as we run that liquid through there multiple times over the course of 20 or 30 minutes usually, we will clear up that extract enough so we can start to transfer it over into the boil kettle. The reason we want to get all that malt, bits, pieces, husk material out of there is if we boil those in the brew kettle, they will create bitterness and astringency in the beer from tannins that are in that husk material. You'll sometimes hear the word tannin associated with wine. Kind of a similar deal here. We don't want to have that kind of grainy bitterness in our finished beer. So we've got this clarified really well. Then we start to pump it over from the grant tank into the brew kettle over here. While we're doing that, we continue to dribble hot water on top, kind of sprinkling around on top of the mash that goes down through the grain bed, extracts more of the color and the sugars that we've generated in the mash, so we can move that all the way over into the brew kettle. And this is the way we get the best efficiency. Some beers you'll hear about being first runnings. That would be the first run through the mash bed and no extra water put on top. But we want to extract all of those good sugars and color out of the mash bed and transfer it into the brew kettle for boiling.